Set. Well, welcome. My name is Brennan Barnard. I am the Director of College Counseling at the Derryfield School in Manchester, New Hampshire, and the College Admission Program Advisor for the Making Caring Common project at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And this is Thursday Night Live, and we have a wonderful panel of admission leaders here with us tonight to speak with you. Just a couple, I'll introduce them in a second, just a quick couple housekeeping pieces is that this is being recorded, and we will send out the recording afterwards for those who registered. Would love to hear, we are now going streaming live on Grown and Flown, and thanks for our partnership with them and their collaboration and their support of this. We would love to have people both in the chat and on the Facebook page just kind of call out where you're coming from and let us know where you are and what's going on in your corner of the world. We have wonderful admission leaders from many corners of our country this evening, and I just want to take a moment to introduce them all. So first of all, we have Rachelle Hernandez, who serves as the Senior Vice Provost for Enrollment Management and Student Success at the University of Texas at Austin. She is a frequent national speaker on admission and student access and success, and is active in the profession, serving in various leadership roles during her over 20+ year career in college admission. Including with the National Association for College Admission Counselors, the ACT, the College Board, and the American Association for Collegiate Registrars and Admission Officers. So welcome, Rachelle. Thanks for being here. Next, we have Leigh Weisenburger, who is the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Bates College. Leigh began her work at Bates in 2004 as an Assistant Dean of Admission, and after a national search in 2012 was named the Dean of Admission. And when Leigh is not on campus collaborating with students and faculty and staff, she's visiting high schools and other organizations to speak about the value of liberal arts education. As a member of the National Association for College Admission Counseling, Leigh was on the faculty for the New England Division's Rising Leaders Colloquium. Welcome, Leigh. And then Santiago Ybarra is the Director of Admission at Pitzer College in California. And Santiago is a first-generation student from the Central Coast of California. And after working as a diversity intern at Pomona College, he graduated to an admission officer and remained at Pomona for 9 years. And in 2010, he made the long journey north, about 3/4 of a mile, to Pitzer College, where he now serves as the director. So welcome to you all. I would love to just start, and maybe Santiago, maybe we'll start with you, and would love to have you just say, 1 minute piece on your school and kind of school community, and then share with us one truth about college admission from where you sit.
Thank you, Brennan. So Pitzer College is in Southern California. We're located on the eastern part of Los Angeles County. We're a member of a consortium, so Pomona College being the founding member, and there are 3 other undergraduate schools in this 1 square mile that make up our intentional consortium. So we have access to classes and clubs at the other schools. We actually share a sports team with Pomona. Because of this consortium, we all are able to have very specific identities. And for us at Pitzer, being formed in the 1960s, we were influenced by that decade. And so we took things like social justice, environmental sustainability, intercultural understanding, and for me, maybe most importantly, student engagement, to form how we would define the liberal arts. And student engagement means that we do allow students to sit on every governing body of the college. So they're able to really push us. We're the first school on the West Coast to divest from fossil fuels, because that was a student initiative. And so for me, the college really represents this idea of our motto, Pro Vita Futuri, mindful of the future, and letting the student body really guide who we are as an institution. And we're almost free to be very specific because we have these 4 sibling colleges who have their own mottos and own priorities and complement us extremely well. So that's kind of Pitzer in a nutshell.
How about one truth about college admission?
One truth about college admission is that every institution is going to have their own priorities, and there's not going to be a one-stop shop answer for any of us. So you might hear very different perspectives from these schools as we answer your question.
The wonderful refrain in college admission is it depends, right? Leigh, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you, Brennan. So again, I'm Leigh Weisenburger, Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Bates College. Bates is a selective liberal arts institution in Lewiston, Maine, so about 2 hours north of Boston. Depending on where you are in the world, we're about 5 hours south of Montreal, so just a little bit of a different orientation for you. We have a rather unique history in that we were founded by idealists who were really committed to the sort of centering point of the liberal arts in terms of educating the whole person, but in particular wanting to make sure that that opportunity to educate the whole person was in fact available to all people. So since our founding, we've been co-educational. So since 1855, which is pretty radical when you think about what was going on in this nation and the globe at that time. And our founders also made a very clear and public statement that we would seek to recruit students regardless of their racial background, ethnic identity, gender identity, and religion. So again, rather progressive for its time, which has really been in our DNA, that those principles of access and inclusion and have followed through since. One modern day way in which that's alive and well is that we have been test optional, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on, for over 35 years, but also that we have a thriving Harvard Center for Community Partnerships. So really taking the work that you do in the classroom and directly relating it to work that you do in the community. So similar to Santiago and Pitzer, thinking about that student engagement. So I could go on and on about Bates offerings, but just to ask you to think about access and inclusion as being at our core from day one. A truth about college admission. I would say, and I think it's reason that the four of us are here with you all in the audience tonight, is it's a human enterprise. We care deeply about students. We care deeply about the students that are currently on our campus, the students we're seeking to bring to our campuses, and we ourselves are human. And so it's wonderful to be here tonight, but as we think about all the elements that work through what is the admission college search process, application process, financial aid process, to just remember that there are humans behind the scenes, and we very much are respecting you as individuals as we collaborate with you. So it's a human process.
Great point. Many of us have kids of our own, and we're brothers and sisters and daughters and spouses and all that kind of thing. So thank you, Leigh. All right, Rachel.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here. My name is Rachelle Hernandez, and again, I'm here from the University of Texas at Austin. And I just want to say hello. I've seen a lot of folks in the chat from Texas, so great to see all the other folks from Texas on there and from across the country. The University of Texas at Austin is a globally renowned research university, and that means a whole host of different things for our students. We have a medical school, we have a law school, and we're really focused on making sure our students can take full advantage of all that the university has to offer. We have over 170 different academic areas of study across 13 colleges and schools. And the point we're really focused on is allowing students to really pursue what their interests are. We have many students who come in with a specific area of study and they're going to get a degree from that particular college. At the same time, we have students who pursue minors in other fields. So we're really focused on making sure that we can help students achieve their dreams. And a big part of that for us is a focus on access and success. Success from our perspective is really allowing for a student to come in with their focus, their interests, and to take full advantage of what the university has to offer, so that as they're preparing for their next steps after college, whether that be their graduate school or a job after college, they've received those opportunities for experiential learning, for internships, where they can really take what's happening in the classroom and engage and connect it to what's to come. Our motto is what starts here changes the world, and we know each of our students, they're a future leader, and they're going to make a difference for all of us. And we see this as investing in our future. So welcome to everyone. So excited to be here to talk with you. Now, a truth, right? One truth. Okay, one truth. I'm going to go a little bit different direction and just be just very practical. When a college or university includes a question on their application, this is a truth. We're really asking that question. We're not looking for something that's not there. We're really not looking for students to try to guess what we want. We're asking a question because, as Leigh mentioned, we're interested in getting to know you as a student, or for the parents who are there, your students. We're interested in hearing what's important to them. We're phrasing the question in a way that conveys what's important to us, and we want to hear back from the student what's important to them. So it's maybe a little bit more practical, but I think you'll hear from us, and you sort of heard my introduction about the University of Texas at Austin. We're all focused on the student. We want to make sure that the student is choosing our campus, that they're excited about coming, that we're ready for them. And to do that, we ask questions that are important to us with the hopes that students will share what they really feel matters. So the questions we ask are really the questions we want you to answer.
You're saying there's no hidden agenda or reverse psychology or?
No hidden agenda, Brett, no hidden agenda. And,
okay.
Yes, as straightforward as possible. Just, again, that's practical, but it's a truth.
That's great, thank you. And hopefully we will get into a lot of really practical, helpful thoughts for folks tonight. And I'm gonna start with a couple questions, but please start throwing things in the chat or the comment section of Facebook, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. And the idea is really this evening to address kind of not just things related to COVID or to the anxiety and noise around college admission, but to give some useful tips on how to kind of move through this in a thoughtful and intentional way. So with that said, we had a bunch of questions in advance, and it's what I'm calling kind of the big three in fall 2020, the questions that we're getting most often. And those are, is test optional really optional? Should I talk about COVID on my college application? And are there gonna be enough spots left over next year because of deferrals from last year? So let's get those out of the way right away, and then we can move on to other stuff. So Santiago, do you wanna start with test optional and just say, just when a school says they're test optional, do they really mean they're test optional?
Yeah, this was actually a question I had when I started at Pitzer, because Pitzer was test optional before I got there, and I had been so used to looking at the SAT or the ACT in the process and kind of factoring it in. And I've been getting this question from some colleagues whose colleges have either moved test optional the last couple of years or just this year in sort of a test mode. And the answer is yes, it really is test optional, and it's super easy to do. I think there's so much more data that we have in the process. We can look at historic applications from individual high schools. We know what a transcript means. We know what that translates into success. So the test is not as necessary, I think, as it used to be because of all that data collection and technology moving forward. And it really is as simple as removing the exam. We don't intentionally do this, but at the end of each admission cycle, we calculate acceptance rates for those who submitted testing and those who do not. We have found a 0.1% difference in those because the test does not validate or invalidate your transcript, and I think that's what we're all going to really focus on. So it really is that simple, and we've heard stories of people driving for hours to get to exams, to be honest. And in California, we're not offering the exam. So if you were in California and I saw an exam in October, I think I'm a little worried that you were so stressed out about taking the exam that you had to do that. You know, trust the process, trust us. I think Rachel hit it on the head. When we're asking the question, we're asking that question. When we say we're test optional, we're saying we're test optional, that it's not necessary, and we're experts enough to be able to make a decision without that morning test that you took on a Saturday.
Great, thanks. Rachel, do you want to comment at all about the question on the chat about kind of larger schools like UT?
Sure. So the question on the chat is, in case everyone can't see it, is how do large schools consider this, especially with the holistic review process that we have? I would echo what Santiago said in the sense that the test has always been, and it will be if a student provides it, just a piece of information that we use that informs our entire review. So just like the transcript, just like the questions that we're asking, just like the individual grades in students' classes, these are all pieces of information, and we don't make a decision based on any single thing. So we're not making a decision based on GPA. We're not making a decision based on grades only. We're not making a decision based on courses only. So when we say that the requirement has been suspended and that students have the option of submitting it, that's what we mean. On our applications and on many other large institution applications, you're going to see this question. If you have my test score, do I want you to use it or not? And a student can say yes or no. If a student tells us no, we're not going to use it. And holistically, we're going to consider all the other pieces of information to make a decision. Our students submit applications as a whole person, and we're going to be reviewing every aspect of the application as a whole person. So to Santiago's point, there isn't a benefit or a negative if a student doesn't submit a test. We want for you to share with us what you think is important, and we will consider that with all the other pieces of information.
Great. Well, maybe you can roll right into that second question, which is, you know, I think it's a two-part question from a lot of students I've been meeting with over the last couple of weeks. And one is, what do you think about me writing my college essay about COVID-19 and the impact? And second of all, should I answer the question on the Common App and Coalition for College application about the impact that COVID has had on them?
Sure. I'm glad you asked this question. Actually, running yesterday, I was in a meeting with several colleagues from all across the country, and we actually talked about this. And the question was, you know, we're getting that question too. Should students answer it? What are you looking for? And I think, like with everything else, we want for students to be able to talk from their perspective. COVID has impacted people very differently across the country in different parts of the country, from different socioeconomic backgrounds. It's impacting students differently. And so this is real. We're all experiencing it, but we're all experiencing it differently. So to answer your question straight on, should a student provide information about COVID or answer the question? If they have information they think is relevant to their experience, speaks to who they are, that may be really important. You know, all of us are talking with students who are having to make some really difficult choices about their time. They can't participate perhaps in a school activity right now because they have to focus on their part-time job. For a particular student, that might be important. For another student, that may not be an issue. And again, just like the test or anything else, we're not looking for a prescribed answer. So as we talked about this yesterday with colleagues, the reference was the same. If you feel that it's impacted you and that's something you want to share with us, then share it. But if you don't feel like it's impacted you, then we're not looking for you to come up with something or create something. Again, one of the examples that a colleague used yesterday was, and I don't mean to make light of this, but it's sort of one end of the spectrum, which is if you're a teenager and you're not thrilled about having to spend every day with your siblings, that's maybe not an answer to provide on that question. But on a very serious note, there are a lot of students who have been affected by COVID very personally and very deeply, their family or their family situation. So again, it's don't feel like you have to answer it if you don't have something there that you feel will convey something different about your application. But if it's important to you and it impacts your experience or it speaks to your experience, then share. We want for you to decide what's important.
That's great, thanks. And I mean, I think it speaks to a larger issue that colleges really want students to provide context for who they are and for the challenges they've had in and out of COVID or the natural disaster. I mean, like fires in California, right, and floods and hurricanes, and
Exactly.
whether it's that or whether it's just a sick parent or a family challenge or financial issues. I mean, those are things that are helpful for college admissions offices to just have a sense for what a student's facing.
That's right. And many of us will ask the question, is there anything else you want for us to know? And we are looking for the kinds of things that you're just sharing. What is important to you? What has shaped your experience as a student and as a person? And what are you going to be bringing to our campuses with you? You know, it's for some students, it's that they have faced adversity. For other students, they've had incredible opportunities. And we're just looking to get to know the student, what they feel is important. And so I would also say, in answering the COVID question, I think authenticity is really important. You know, what does it authentically mean to you to have gone through this experience or to have faced a challenging experience with COVID? That would be something to share. But don't feel like you have to fill it out if it doesn't, if it's not shaping you at this moment.
Like we had to go remotely at school last spring is not really, if it's something that everyone is experiencing,
Right.
probably not that necessary. And just to follow up, one last thing is this idea of, you know, should I not talk about it in my college essay? Should I?
Sure. I think that folks are sort of anticipating the college essay being about COVID this year, but to your point, everyone's going through COVID and everyone's having some kind of experience. I think our colleagues across the country, again, as we talked about this yesterday, sort of the general advice is COVID's not the first topic that should come to mind unless it's really shaped where you are right now and shaped who you are right now. There are so many other facets of the student experience that we want to get to know the student. So lots of other topics out there. Choose it if it's relevant, but don't choose it because you think we'll be looking for it, because we're not going to make that assumption.
Great, thank you so much. All right, Leigh, you want to take that last one on this question of deferrals, and this is the third of the big three. And you know, families are worried that that there's this huge move towards the last year's class, the class of 2020, graduating high school, deferred going to college for a year, and therefore there will be no spots left over for this year's graduating seniors. Any thoughts?
Sure, plenty. So thank you for the question. And I think it was said earlier, this is one where it does depend. It'll depend institution to institution. As I think about Bates, Pitzer, UT, the sizes of our first year classes alone run the gamut. And so not just the size of our first year classes, but what I also imagine the size of the cohort that may have taken a gap semester or a gap year, a deferral, as it's more broadly referred to. So when I think of a place like Bates, just to put some numbers there, we have a first year class of about 500 students. Typically we see about 25 gap years. This year we saw closer to 50. So yes, it doubled, but it didn't quadruple. So I will say it will depend institution to institution. And I also, and this is not to back out of or evade the question, I think in many instances it's too soon to know. So as we theorize about these students who took a deferral, given COVID, given the circumstances under which they selected to take a deferral, I would argue there's a significant question mark around how many of those students will in fact persist and fully follow through with arriving on any one of our given campuses or our peers across the nation. So that puts another variable in play as we think about how it how it might shape up or shape out. We're also here tonight because we're excited about recruiting future classes of students coming to our colleges and universities. So the classes of 2026, 2025, beyond. So I really would say that we're marching ahead, many of us, imagining that our first year class size will be pretty darn close to what the target has been in previous years, and that we're trying to get back on cycle, if you will, with our overall enrollment. It doesn't help an institution where there are peaks and valleys. And so I imagine many institutions will look ahead next year thinking about, yes, okay, now we have a decent crop of deferrals coming in, but we're not going to throttle back entirely on the next incoming class because we'd like to keep things as even as possible. So this is where it becomes enrollment management, because it's not just one class in one snapshot. And in some ways it's still a little too soon to know, but many of us are forging ahead as we would in previous years.
Yeah, and everything, I put two articles that I wrote recently for our local paper, one about test optional, one about this deferral issue. So if people want to check those out. I think everything I've been hearing from college admissions officers, like you said, is that the kind of the initial hype around all these students taking gap years did not really come to fruition in the same way that it was reported. And that, and even where it did, that they're in their enrollment management, it's not going to affect this year's senior class, that they're making adjustments as needed. Do either Rachel or Santiago, do either of you want to comment on that? Okay. So another question that folks have had is around kind of early action and early decision. And if early decision, for those who don't know, being the binding college application, and early action being early, receiving your decision early, but not necessarily being bound to attend. Would you, any thoughts from any of you on whether or not kind of colleges are be leaning more heavily on early programs this year, or how that might change? What you're hearing?
I haven't heard a lot about people wanting to change that. You know, I think like everybody else, any sense of normalcy is what we're looking for. And I honestly anticipate that the early decision application numbers probably won't be as strong, because early decision students have usually gotten a chance to visit, you know, kick the tires, do all of that. And I think for a lot of us, that's not going to be the opportunity this time around, certainly not in California. And I think I would rather have applicants who know for sure that this is the right place for them and who've gotten all of those opportunities. So I don't think we're gonna go over an early decision and keep out those students who won't have a chance to visit until next semester. That just doesn't make any sense to me. You know, we want the most informed students in the process. And so I don't think any of us will go early sort of out of some sense of desperation. Like that just doesn't make any sense to me.
Just to lock in a larger class, or okay, that's really helpful. What about maybe Rachel or Leigh, two very different schools in terms of this process, but can you talk at all about how this is impacting athletic recruitment at your schools? And is the timeline shifting, the number of recruits shifting, that kind of thing? Rachel, do you want to, or Leigh, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. So yes, Rachel and I come from two very different worlds, two very competitive worlds, but different in size and whatnot. So Bates, I'll share, is a Division III institution. We're part of the NESCAC conference, so New England Small Colleges Athletic Conference, arguably the most competitive Division III conference. There's 11 institutions against whom we compete. So we have pretty strict NESCAC admission policy, to say the least, along with a very clear calendar. So those policies, that calendar has not shifted. However, the institutions in our league are not permitting visitors on campus, and coaches are not permitted to be actively recruiting. So that has definitely shifted the recruitment practice, but not the timeline. And what we're finding, at least preliminarily, our admission deadlines have not occurred. And while students are student athletes and can be recruited heavily by coaches, nothing is definite until an admission decision is rendered by the Office of Admission. However, as our coaches are working closely with students with whom they're recruiting, we are finding that many of those students are still moving forward, thinking about applying early, where perhaps they've been a committed student athlete for many, many years, and this has been something they've been working towards for quite some time. So deadlines, timelines aren't shifting, similar to how I commented on thinking about deferrals and the impact on the class. There, we're asking our coaches to still sort of stay the course, where we don't want to again see these peaks and valleys on rosters either. So I don't want to say entirely normal, but we're still planning for what would be a quote unquote ordinary academic year and an ordinary athletic calendar for the following year. So
great. So when you say they're not recruiting, you mean they're not recruiting on campus. They're not bringing students on campus, but they're actively
correct.
And, probably still going to some
virtually, yes. So they're virtually interacting with student athletes.
That's great. Rachel, any thoughts from the different?
So we're a Division I schools, as folks and many folks know, and the thing I would just offer is, just like Leigh just said, we are all very careful about making sure that we're not impacting students or their eligibility. So our advice always is to have our students contact the coach, and they can determine what the timeline is and the way they're working with them. I will say that from an admissions perspective, to Leigh's point, our admissions timelines have not changed. And so our campuses are working with students as they have, and adhering pretty strictly to guidelines, just to make sure that there isn't any confusion for students, and also to make sure that we're clear about our processes as well. The University of Texas at Austin does have students on campus. We do have classes both in person and online right now. And we are hosting, just from an admissions perspective, we are hosting some small in-person visits as well. So.
Great, thank you. Feel free to throw questions in there as you have them, but I'm gonna, another question we received in advance, and I'm also gonna piggyback on it because I have my own son is a junior in high school, and a lot of junior families are wondering, you know, some of the seniors are in it and have kind of thrown themselves into the virtual search and that kind of thing. What should juniors be doing right now, juniors in high school, as they think about approaching? My son probably not watching. I'm actually know he's not watching. But for the rest of the juniors in the country, what should they be doing? What should they be thinking about? Santiago, do you want to start, and we can maybe everybody can just give some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it is a challenge for everybody. It's a challenge for all of us to do all this virtually, but I think juniors should be thinking of how they can engage with their communities, how can they engage with their high schools. It's not the same, obviously, as being in person. It's a lot more challenging, but I think the juniors have a little bit of time to rev up to that challenge and to get to where they need to be to make the most out of their high school experience. And I think there's still a lot going on and a lot that you can engage with. You know, for a place like Pitzer and probably Bates, yesterday's court announcement is hard to take. And I think it gives students the opportunity to figure out, what can I do now in a virtual world to really address these issues and to bring attention to things that are important to me? I don't think this is a time where you just give up and say, well, it's COVID, so I'm not going to do anything and I'm going to go into a cave. It's fine if you did that for a little bit. I think we all did, and we probably all will again. You know, the cycle will continue for all of us. But I think you also kind of need to show who you are and what you do after you take that initial shock of COVID, and how do you bounce back in high school? How do you adapt? I think for all colleges, and I think liberal arts colleges talk about this a lot, you know, we're here to teach you how to learn. We're here to teach you about that job that doesn't exist yet. We're here to teach you how to grow. And this is a chance for you to show us how either you've grown on your own or how you've let your educators at your high schools or your community leaders help you grow, even though it's not the ideal situation.
Thanks. Rachel?
Yeah, I would second a lot of what Santiago said. I think I hear this question actually a lot, and I saw there was a note on the chat that folks were glad that you asked it. What should we be doing? You know, if it were a different year, I might be visiting campuses with my student. And I think one of the things we can all do is kind of take a deep breath, because we can't do the same things that we could do before in person. We can't even always go down the street if there's a college down the street to go see it in the same way or meet with people in the same way. But I will say this, for many of our colleges, there is actually an increased level of accessibility to the people who make up our communities. So our campus is doing this, and I know many others, and I'm sure both Santiago and Leigh will share this as well. Our faculty members are doing sessions with prospective students and current students. Our current students are meeting with students online, and it just gives students an opportunity, and maybe even with less pressure than perhaps before, to go on to a video chat, ask some questions, not feel like all eyes are on them necessarily when they're asking a question. There are also lots of colleges doing sessions for parents to help parents understand what the process is like. I've seen a couple of questions in the chats related not only to athletics like we were just talking, but what about different financial aid programs or timelines. And I think we really are, even if it's not in person, we're all more accessible. Many of us are using chats and videos and phone calls and a host, even YouTube programs, a host of different options to allow people to ask questions when they have them, when they're important to them. So from a junior perspective, I think it would be great for families to just ask their student what they're interested in, and maybe just go to a session of a college that has that program. But, you know, I've got a high school student at home as well. He's not watching right now,
No.
but we're using this time to ask him what classes he likes and what he's interested in. If he could visit a college right now, what first comes to mind? And we're using the opportunity to see what video programs they have, really kind of to take some slow steps forward, but to try to reduce the pressure that maybe students feel at this time of year, even in the junior year. The other thing I would say that I think is really important for all of us, you know, when we say take a deep breath, this is the junior year of a student's experience. They probably didn't have a tail end of the sophomore year that they had anticipated or expected. And so these first few weeks of school are also just getting acclimated to this new environment, whatever it might be, if it's a hybrid environment or an in-person or an online. And I would really love to see them engaging in their class experiences, taking time to talk to their teachers if they have questions about the material that they're studying, because this transition, this junior year, is a key learning year also. So we really want for students to be successful in whatever the environment is that they are in right now. And as far as the college search, there are lots of opportunities to engage without adding a lot of extra pressure about visiting or asking a lot of questions right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I put in the chat this piece I wrote a week or two ago about kind of how students, it kind of builds off what both you and Santiago were saying, is that, like, instead of saying kind of why now, and you know, we had those moments of kind of, man, this is really happening and look at all I've lost. This this kind of flipping the question, instead of saying why now, saying now why, right? And asking these questions about why am I doing the things I'm doing, and why do I love going to chemistry and maybe not so much, history, or, and really taking time to step back and look at those different parts of what students do in and out of class, and then and take stock.
It's one of those times as parents, I think, where particularly, when you have a teenager, they're not always readily telling you everything that's going on. So we have these really incredible moments right now to just listen a little differently, and find out a little bit more about what they're interested in or what they love, and have a little bit, again, a little less stressful perhaps conversation about what they might be interested in. So this may be a great opportunity for us to take a step back and really hear where our students' interests are.
Thanks. Leigh?
I was going to say much of what you said. It looks like, did I freeze?
Your picture did, but your voice didn't. So, oh, there you're back.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
I'll keep talking. There we are. So I was sitting here listening, and prior even thinking much of what you've all articulated. I would say pre-COVID, I would have had this same response, and so I want to share it now. But high school juniors in particular, your job is to be a high school student. And I know that might not sound like the sexiest thing in the world, but enjoy that privilege that your primary focus, your job should be to do what you do best, which is be that high school student. How that might differ a bit in COVID, I think my colleagues have stated that well tonight, but as we're all experiencing a little bit of a slower pace in the world, to really just take stock of what resonates with you, what excites you, what are you curious about? On the flip side, what bores you? Maybe still give it a little bit of a chance to probe and understand fully what bores you, not just throw it aside at first sort of moment there, but to stay in this slower pace, to make sure the time you're dedicating to various activities, whether academic or co-curricular, you know that they are truly meaningful to you and that you're doing them for yourself, not for the pleasure of others or to please others. So I would have said much of what my colleague said already beautifully.
Thanks. And I will say that, COVID and the pandemic is still having a significant impact, and that I know you also, I'll put it in the chat here, but I know you all signed the statement from Making Caring Common about kind of dean's care in crisis. Like that admission officers, admission leaders know that things are not normal, right? Like even now, they definitely weren't in the spring. And even now, at Derryfield, because of the flow of, we are doing in-person schooling, but because of the flow, activities that students normally would have done aren't happening in the same way. And they're still trying to do clubs and things like that virtually, and developing opportunities like that. But there's a lot that students still can't do. And there's a lot that students and families are still being impacted by, right? And some students are staying home and learning remotely because they're helping take care of a younger sibling or an elderly relative, or a working half-time job, a frontline job, because they're trying to help parents with family finances. So I think those are really important pieces to mention. There was a question about interviews, and Leigh, I don't know, do you want to just add on to that? What's the role of interviews, virtual interviews at this time, and should students do them? Are they, how important are they? Are they being tracked? All that kind of stuff.
Sure, sure. So admission interviews, this again is an item that will depend per institution. Some colleges offer interviews, others don't. In terms of what their offerings are, they could vary greatly. It could be with an admission staff person, it could be with an admission intern, a senior that attends that institution, it could be with an alum. The interview might be evaluative, meaning that a write-up might be captured after the conversation, or it might be strictly informational, where it's an exchange of questions, where you essentially are getting a sort of one-on-one information session on the institution. So one, just do your research to understand what the interview offerings are for any given college or university first, before selecting or deciding that this is something that you wish to dive into. I will share Bates as an institution that does offer interviews. We do offer them in a virtual space, though I will share the numbers seem to be down just as of today. And I think that's just as a comfort level moment. I think we still are transitioning into that world, and students still are. And to Rachel's point earlier, we're offering such a myriad of virtual offerings. Many students and families are interacting with us that way, getting a lot of their questions answered. So perhaps not finding so much of a need for that one-on-one virtual interview. That's just Bates's data. We'll see how that shapes up over the next couple of months. But I think virtual interviews, just as they would have been in person, or if you were meeting with an alum in the area, can be a great opportunity for a student who's further along in their research process with any given college or university. So that ideally you've done a tour, in this case, likely a virtual tour. Ideally, you've done an information session, again, likely virtual, perhaps participated in other panels or offerings that the college might have, and then say, okay, this really is towards the top of my list, and I think it would be beneficial for me to learn more about the institution, but also to share a bit more. So I would do an interview later on as you work through your search process. And just one tip, always have questions prepared. As somebody who used to spend a lot of time interviewing, we always like to say to students, so what's on your mind? What questions do you have for me? And it's helpful and insightful to know what those questions are.
Yeah, Santiago.
I guess I just want to remind people that these are optional. I guess opposite of Bates, for whatever reason, probably because now we have the virtual information sessions and you can go to them at 9 in the morning or 8 o'clock at night. You can go to them from Beijing or New Hampshire. We put up our interviews about a week and a half ago for the entire semester, and they were gone within days. We're offering less because our student workers hours have been reduced. And I don't want people to feel like if you don't get an interview, that's a signal about what's going to happen with your admission decision, because we know our limitations. So if you run into the case where interviews are just gone, we'll try to put up more as we can, but it's not going to hinder you that we have limitations in being able to offer as many interviews as the demand.
That's a great point. All right. Did you want to say something, Rachel? No.
I was just going to share that one thing that I think gets lost when we talk about the interview is that it's always about, is the institution interviewing the student? But just as a reminder to our families out there, that if a student is participating in an interview, whether it is part of the admissions process or informational, we know the student's interviewing us. So I just don't want that to get lost, that if a student participates in an interview, we know that they're learning from us, and we know that the student may feel like they're on stage, we're on stage too. We're trying to make sure we provide information. So I just hope that students realize they're really in the driver's seat, even in the interview process.
That's a great point, and it speaks a lot about kind of student agency and student choice, and that too often I think students kind of approach this experience of searching for and applying to college as something that kind of happens to them, or that's something they have to kind of endure if they are, if they're lucky enough to be going to college. That it's important to look at it in that kind of flipped way of like, I'm getting to make a lot of the decisions. Maybe ultimately they're deciding whether or not to admit me, but I get to make a lot of decisions. There is a question here about recommendations. Let's see, so would you recommend I get letters of recommendations from teachers so they at least reference my performance? Like, I guess just when you look at teacher recommendations, what are you looking for in teacher recommendations? Leigh, do you want to?
Sure. So we're looking to teacher recommendations, and it'll vary per institution what they require in the zone of recommendations. But we're creating a very intentional living and learning community. And so we look to those recommendation letters to understand who you are as a learner, how you'll contribute to the classroom environment, the dialogue, and perhaps even how you'll contribute to the community beyond the classroom. There isn't a precise equation or a rubric here with which we read those recommendation letters, because it takes all types to have a robust dialogue and learning environment. But we're really trying to get a sense of, again, how you learn and how you might participate. It also can be really useful to get a recommendation letter from a teacher or from an instructor where maybe you struggled a little bit in the course, so they can speak to how you were able to navigate those setbacks, how you recovered, what tools you used, what resources you were comfortable asking for, how you sought assistance, and then maybe how you turned that around and were able to provide guidance or assistance to others. So don't feel like it needs to be from the teachers where you had A's across the board, or necessarily from course subjects where you plan to major, but somebody who knows you well and can speak to who you are as a learner.
That's great. Rachel, do you want to add anything to that?
I would just piggyback. I think one of the questions that was posted sort of as a precursor was about spring grades and high schools that maybe didn't give letter grades. And just for all the families out there, most colleges and universities across the country also allowed pass-fail or some other options with grading in the spring. So whatever it is that your high school decided to do last spring, just know that it's our job to make sure we know that. And that, again, that we're taking that into consideration. There's no penalty for a student because of a decision that a school made. So we'll take into account that information. And to Leigh's point, with last spring, some students have asked, should I ask one of my teachers to give a recommendation because of, you know, how I handled that transition? Again, it's up to the student, but just don't worry about your school looking different than others, because the colleges and universities across the country are also dealt with that last spring, and we're going to be really familiar and look to expect that, not only for students applying for this next year, but our juniors right now who may have not had grades last spring or may have had pass-fail last spring. It's the same thing. We'll be watching for that. So I don't want for students and families to be worried about that aspect of their transcript.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think it's important for students to kind of consider what might be missing from their application or what voices that have not been heard from, and then kind of ask for recommendations based on that. Like who do they want to have kind of a weigh in on them and who they are.
And to that point, don't worry about the name or the title of the recommender. We're looking for the person who can speak best to you and who you are as a person. So we're not, even if the title seems like a big deal, we're interested in what they say about you. The title isn't going to impact the way we read that letter. What they say will impact how we read that letter.
Right. There's always those letters that come from some politician or some kind of public figure that clearly doesn't know the student but has been asked to write, and that does not do much good. Okay, so I know we're getting close to time here. So the one question I've been ending with, and would love to have you all kind of give some thoughts on this. The one question I've been ending with is, if you were to go back and do it again, what would you do differently about your college search? Knowing what you know now, or what would you tell if your younger self was going through this process now? What would you do differently? So why don't we start with Rachel, and then we'll go Santiago, and then Leigh.
I think we all appreciate that question, and we can all say the world is very different now. I was a low income student, and I think what I might do differently now is just ask more questions about what's available in terms of financial aid and financial support. Many of our institutions not only have support, but there's also federal and state aid for students who come from low income families. And also on that note, I mentioned earlier that I have a student in high school right now. And one of the things, if I could transition to say what advice I would give him, really, Brendan, because gosh, it seems like so long ago, right?
What would you give my son?
Right. We talk to our son all the time about asking the questions that are important to him. I think as a high school student, and particularly as a low income student, I don't know that you talked about agency earlier. I don't know that I always felt comfortable asking the questions that I had. And, we're all here because our students matter, our students' families matter. And we really want for students to know that all questions are good questions, because your questions stem from your experience, where you are, and the information that you need to make a decision. So if I could do it again, or if I could give advice to my son, I would say, if you have a question, ask somebody at the college that you're interested in. Don't ask your friend or another parent. Contact the college or university directly, because we're here to make sure you get good, accurate information and to really support you in your college search. We want to help you achieve your dreams. That's our goal too.
That's a great point. I love that point about kind of the sources of your information, right? College Confidential or Reddit or some of those things aren't necessarily always the best sources of quality information about college search. So
I'd say contact one of our colleagues here before you read that.
Yes, there we go. Santiago, what do you think?
Yeah, aren't always the best is an understatement by far. I guess similar to Rachel, I was low income. I was first gen. I worked really hard, and I had this very narrow view of what I thought I needed to do for college and what like my hard work should lead me to. And I really was under the impression that somehow if I made it into some of these schools that were highly ranked or had some name recognition, that I'd kind of be all set and like, make it to that college and your life is all set. And then you grow up, you graduate from college, you start making friends from other places, and you see success from a lot of different backgrounds. You don't have to go to Harvard to be successful. You'll meet people from the state schools, from the community college, and you're like, oh my God, that person is brilliant, and I wish I were them, because they went to the school that was right for them. They didn't go to the school that they thought was going to lay the path for them. There's no such school. There's no point in going to a school like Harvard if you're not going to be successful and happy there. So, but there is a point in going to, I don't know, a school down the street here, a Cal State, where you are happy and you're connecting and you're having a lot of opportunities and you're just thriving. So I think I would go back and tell myself to forget what television and the rankings have taught you about what success and college achievement means.
That's great. I could go on for another hour about the rankings, but everybody lucked out that we're approaching 8 o'clock, so you saved me from that diatribe. Leigh, I know it's there's some time before your children go off to college, and who knows what a mission will look like in that day and age. But what would you tell yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my daughter started kindergarten today, which is pretty incredible. So much like Rachel, I just urge you to ask questions. I'll give a quick example. I was afraid and embarrassed to ever ask what the liberal arts truly means. And as a result, I didn't end up at a liberal arts institution first. So this goes to my second piece of advice, really, which is you might make a mistake the first time out of the gates and it'll be okay. So I was a transfer student, and at that moment, I thought it was the most earth-shattering experience. And I failed my parents and a whole host of other people. And now I look back on it fondly, and I wouldn't change that experience for the world. That second go around, I really figured out more through process of elimination what I needed and wanted, rather than sort of this additive model, a little bit to what Santiago was saying, like I have to do all this because it's what's good. So really, I think what I would tell myself is do your best, and if it doesn't work out so well, it'll still work out. Really and truly, I'm not a developmental psychologist, but 17, 18, 19 are wildly different years in who I was, and what I knew I needed and wanted at 19 compared to 17 was night and day. So yeah, it'll work out.
That's a great point and a great message to end on. Thank you all so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and for all that you do for students and families. Thanks again to our friends at Grown and Flown, and to all of you who joined us this evening. And we'll send this out to those who registered probably in a couple days, and with registration information for the next Thursday Night Live, which will happen. We're doing it every 2 weeks this fall. So tune in again. And until then, be well and stay well.